Have you heard of the Minamata disaster? Minamata disease first appeared in Minamata Bay in Kumamoto Prefecture, Japan in 1953 and 1956, when the Chiso Corporation's chemical factory began releasing methyl mercury in the industrial wastewater. 956 civilians in Japan were the victims of severe methyl mercury poisoning. The Chiso Corporation first opened a chemical factory in Minamata in 1908. Initially producing fertilizers, the factory branched out into production of acetylene, acetaldehyde, acetic acid, vinyl chloride, and octanol, among others. By 1951, production had jumped to 6,000 tons per year, over 50% of Japan's total output. The waste products from the company were released into Minamata Bay in the factory wastewater. Chiso changed the drainage channel from Minamata Bay to the Minamata River mouth in 1958. In March of 1959, patients began to appear near the river mouth as well. The Kumamoto Prefecture government recommended not eating fish from the bay, but did not actually prohibit this practice. Consumption of the infected fish caused symptoms including narrowing of the vision, muscle weakness, auditory disturbances, amongst others. 2,273 cases of Minamata disease were recorded, and it took officials 12 years to finally admit the cause of the contamination and to stop the mercury dumping. Methyl mercury is a highly poisonous organic mercury compound, created when inorganic mercury is dissolved into water and methylated by organisms. It influences enzymes, cell membrane function, and amino acid transport. The Chiso Corporation's chemical reaction used to produce acetaldehyde used mercury sulfate as a catalyst, causing the production of methyl mercury. This was discharged into the sea, accumulating in fish and shellfish by absorption through their gills and digestive tracts. Methyl mercury has the strongest toxicity in humans, with water being a major source of exposure. When methyl mercury enters the human body, it produces disulfides with a high chemical affinity to protein sulfhydryl groups. Disulfides make protein structures and enzyme functions nonspecific and cause poisoning, as occurred in the Minamata disaster. Methyl mercury is then separated by gastric acid and combines with amino acids in the small intestine, where 100% of mercury is absorbed. Afterwards, it combines with the hemoglobin of red blood cells and accumulates in and causes disorders of the central nervous system. The main symptoms in adults were sensory disturbances in limbs, as well as speech, hearing, and vision disruption. Fetal effects were also observed since the methyl mercury transferred across the placenta during pregnancy. These fetuses experienced severe developmental delays later in life. For instance, paralysis, intellectual disabilities, and limb deformities were all commonly seen in children. Some patients exhibited all of these major symptoms, which often resulted in death. Key aspects of the disaster are unknown, such as the exact number of Minamata disease sufferers and the area and duration of exposure. There is not even a consensus on the definition of Minamata disease, making it hard to count the number of patients and determine who qualifies for compensation. Certification of exposure to the disease was carried out by the Japanese government based on the results of specialized medical examinations. Hence, over the years, 2,273 people have been officially certified as permanently disabled, of whom 1,784 people have died. Compensation payments of more than 66 billion Japanese yen to another 10,000 people have been distributed by the Chiso Corporation and the Japanese government, and at least another 20,000 victims are thought to have been affected. Following the disaster, fishing and consumption of seafood caught from Minamata Bay was restricted. This severely impacted the fishing industry, forcing Chiso Corporation to pay 5 billion yen between 1959 and 1992 as compensation to fishermen and their companies. Furthermore, at the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee's opening session, Japan hosted the Minamata Convention to establish the Global Mercury Agreement to ensure that the human health and environmental disaster caused by methyl mercury in Japan would never be repeated. In areas around Minamata Bay, there is still anxiety about the health effects of methyl mercury existing amongst inhabitants. As such, various investigations regarding water quality and contamination of fish have been carried out to determine the presence of methyl mercury. It was determined that exposure levels that could cause Minamata disease existed until no later than 1968. The government has implemented comprehensive measures for periodic health examinations, and monitoring of methyl mercury concentration continues, even today in these impacted areas. Research and investigation determined clinical features of the diseases and mechanism of damage to the body by methyl mercury. The National Institute of Minamata Disease carried out a comprehensive research program based on a variety of Minamata Bay citizens' experiences with methyl mercury poisoning. This was in an effort to contribute to benefiting environmental and human health on an international scale. Aside from the devastating health ramifications of mercury poisoning, the fallout from the Minamata disaster also had significant environmental, economic, and social repercussions. Before the onset of Minamata disease among the human population, the alarming effects of methylmercury poisoning started to surface in the 1950s. Fish bellied up, seabirds dropped into the water and drowned, and the locals reported an outbreak of cat dancing disease, in which cats staggered, salivated, convulsed, and collapsed. The echoes of the Chiso Corporation's toxic effluent will be felt throughout the environment for years to come. Due to methylmercury's highly stable and lipophilic nature, it is not easily metabolized and eliminated by aquatic organisms, potentially giving this compound a half-life of up to 8 years in fish tissues, depending on the species. Before the onset of the disaster, Minamata was a thriving industrial city with the Chiso Corporation as its economic backbone, supporting over 4,000 employees. However, since 1973, under court order, Chiso has paid upwards of 2 billion yen in compensation and cleanup costs, effectively bankrupting the company. Chiso was forced to cut back production and reduce its labor force at some of its plants, including Minamata's, where the number of workers has declined by 2/3 since 1956. However, before the construction of the Chiso plant, Minamata was primarily a fishing community, and the disaster has cost an estimated 689 million yen a year in damages to the fishing industry. Minamata's economy has not recovered from the loss of Chiso jobs or the death of the fishing community. 40% of Minamata's revenue comes from government subsidies, its unemployment rate is double the national average, and its population has dropped from 50,000 to less than 33,000. Perhaps harder to quantify, but just as pertinent to mention, is the social fallout from the Minamata disaster, since the city has become synonymous with pollution. Tourists who once flocked there for its hot springs and natural beauty have stopped coming for fear of falling ill. The youth of Minamata often leave for other cities to find employment, frequently concealing their place of birth for fear of being labeled as polluted and subsequently rejected by both employers and romantic partners. So, would you visit Minamata Bay?